Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. We
Mm.
love to pick a really interesting topic and just explore it in detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today, we're going to be diving into the psychology of money and why we make decisions that sometimes to an outsider might look a little bit irrational.
Yeah, it's funny you should say irrational because that's exactly the first thing I thought of when I saw the topic and the sources you sent me. You'd think that finance would be one of the most rational, you know, areas of decision making. You've got numbers, you've got spreadsheets,
Yeah.
but it just seems like there's something else going on.
Yeah, and in fact, that was one of the things that really jumped out to me from the research that I did and, going through all your source material, that there's so much more than just, the numbers game when it comes to money. And I think the stories that you provided about Ronald Reed and Richard Fuscone,
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a contrast, this janitor who amasses this, multi-million-dollar fortune.
Mm.
And then you have this Harvard-educated,
Yeah.
financial whiz
Yeah.
who ends up bankrupt.
Yeah.
I mean, it just shows you that there's something else going on.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Actually, finance is one of the few fields where somebody with no formal training can actually outperform somebody with, the best education and connections. It really shows you the power of behavior over, just raw intelligence when it comes to money.
Well, and that's what's so interesting. And, as I was going through your source material, I mean, it's really about, it's like this financial fingerprint that we all develop.
Yeah.
And it's almost subconscious. I mean, these decisions that we're making about money, they're driven by forces that we're not even really aware of.
Absolutely. Your sources use the term money scripts, and they talk about how these scripts that we develop around money, come from deeply ingrained beliefs and habits.
Right.
And what's interesting is they can be incredibly powerful even if they're based on limited or flawed experiences.
So in other words, like if you grew up, let's say, during a recession, you might be very risk averse when it comes to investing. Even though logically, years later, the economy is booming, things are going great,
Yeah.
you still have that sort of underlying fear.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think it really underscores the point that your sources make that personal experience accounts for like 80% of how we think the world works, which is kind of wild considering it represents just a tiny fraction of what's actually happened in history.
It's like we're looking at the world through a keyhole and thinking that that's the whole picture.
Exactly. And one of the anecdotes that I found really fascinating was about a tech executive who threw gold coins into the ocean and then wildly overpaid for a broken lamp. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy right on the surface. His actions seem completely irrational. But if you dig deeper into his personal history, you might discover that he grew up witnessing his family lose everything during a financial crisis. And that experience could have created this deep-seated distrust of traditional financial systems and led him to seek out these alternative forms of value and security.
So what seems crazy to an outsider really is making perfect sense when you look at the context of, where this person's coming from and what their experiences have been.
Precisely. And this brings us to a really crucial point that I think your sources emphasize, which is that no one is truly crazy when it comes to money. Everyone approaches money with a unique perspective, and that perspective is shaped by, their upbringing, economic conditions during their formative years, and even, just job market fluctuations that they've witnessed.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're all playing the same game, but we've all been given completely different rule books.
Think about John F. Kennedy. He led the U.S. during a time of, tremendous economic change, but he admitted to having like no firsthand knowledge of the Great Depression because his family's wealth shielded him from, the effects.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful example.
So even within the same time period, right, people can be living in very different realities.
Right.
And those different realities are going to shape their, their worldviews and their money scripts.
Well, so let's talk about some other examples of these rule book differences that we're seeing today. I mean, how is that shaping people's financial decisions in the here and now?
Well, I think one really interesting area to look at is the stock market. Imagine two people, one born in 1950 and the other in 1970. The person born in 1970 would see the S&P 500, increase almost tenfold during their teens and 20s.
Wow.
But for the person born in 1950, the market basically flatlined during that same period.
Huge difference.
Right. So the person who came of age during this period of rapid market growth might be much more inclined to, take risks with their investments, whereas the person who experienced a stagnant market might be much more cautious.
Makes sense. Yeah. And it's not about who's smarter or who's more informed. It's about how those experiences have shaped their perception of risk and reward.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the stock market. Think about inflation. For those born in the 1960s, prices more than tripled during their youth, right? Creating this, vivid memory of economic instability.
Right.
But for those born in the 1990s, inflation has been so low, it's barely a blip on their radar.
I mean, it's almost like they're speaking different financial languages.
Right.
So no wonder there's so much, confusion and disagreement when we try to talk about money.
And it's not just generations either. Your sources highlight how unemployment rates can vary significantly based on demographics, for example. During the 2008 recession, the unemployment rate for young African-American men without a high school diploma was a staggering 49%.
Wow, almost half.
While at the same time, the unemployment rate for Caucasian women over 45 with a college degree was only 4%. So economic downturns don't impact everyone equally.
Right.
And those experiences can leave a lasting mark on, how people approach money.
So even within the same country, people can have these radically different financial realities.
Absolutely. And then those differences become even more pronounced when you consider global events, right? During World War II, stock markets in Germany and Japan were decimated, while the U.S. stock market more than doubled.
Wow. I mean, it's a powerful reminder that geography and global events can play a huge role in shaping our financial realities and then therefore shaping our financial decisions.
And that's why I think it's so important to be aware of these different rule books.
Right.
It helps us understand why people make the choices they do, even if those choices seem, irrational or even just wrong from our own perspective.
Yeah, it's all about empathy and perspective, isn't it? Putting ourselves in other people's shoes and trying to see the world through their financial lens.
Exactly. And I think that understanding can lead to much more productive conversations and ultimately better financial outcomes for everyone involved.
Well, let's dive deeper into those productive conversations
Yeah.
and how we can, really start to bridge the gap between these very different money scripts that people are operating from. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a minute. So we've been talking about how, personal experiences create these money scripts that can sometimes lead to decisions that seem a little bit irrational.
Right.
But what about things like, buying lottery tickets?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive that people with very limited resources would spend a significant portion of their income on something that, logically the odds of winning are so slim.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and it's a great example of how, emotions and social context can sometimes override, pure logic in financial decision making.
So it's not just about, the potential payout.
Right.
There's something else going on there.
Exactly. Your sources suggest that for some people, lottery tickets represent more than just a chance to win money. They represent hope, a tangible dream in a situation that can feel very hopeless.
So for someone who's really struggling to make ends meet, that little piece of paper could represent, potential escape from financial hardship.
Precisely. It's a way to buy into a dream, even if the odds are stacked against them. It's a powerful reminder that financial decisions are rarely, if ever, based solely on, cold, hard logic, emotions, personal history, social context. It all comes into play.
Yeah, it's like we're all navigating this, complex emotional landscape when it comes to money. And sometimes those emotions lead us down these paths that, from the outside looking in, don't make a whole lot of sense.
Right. And speaking of paths that don't always make sense, let's talk about, the relative newness of modern finance. I think we often, kind of just assume that concepts like retirement planning or college savings or even, widespread consumer debt have always been with us. But that's just simply not true.
Wait, really? I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's one of those things that kind of gets overlooked. But the idea of retirement as this sort of universal, right, it's barely 2 generations old. I mean, prior to World War II, most Americans worked until they died.
Wow. So this whole concept of, saving for retirement is actually a relatively recent invention.
Precisely. And even when Social Security was introduced, the initial benefits were tiny. I mean, it wasn't designed to fully support a comfortable retirement. Your sources point out that it wasn't until the 1980s that the average Social Security check exceeded $1,000 a month adjusted for inflation.
It's not that long ago. And what about things like 401ks and Roth IRAs? I mean, weren't those always around?
No, not at all. The 401k, which is kind of, a cornerstone of retirement savings in the U.S., didn't even exist until 1978. And the Roth IRA, which a lot of people rely on for, tax-advantaged retirement savings, that wasn't created until 1998.
So we're essentially all kind of figuring this retirement thing out as we go along,
Yeah.
without a whole lot of, historical precedent to guide us.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
not just retirement. Your sources highlight how the landscape of college education has also, undergone this dramatic transformation. The percentage of Americans with a college degree has skyrocketed in recent decades. And of course, tuition costs have followed suit.
Right.
So this has created a whole new set of financial challenges for individuals and families, trying to navigate, the complexities of paying for higher education.
It's like we're constantly playing catch up with all these evolving financial expectations.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We're bombarded with all these messages about, the importance of saving for retirement and investing wisely and paying for college. But the systems themselves are relatively new and constantly changing, so no wonder so many people feel overwhelmed and make mistakes.
Yeah, it's like we've been handed this really complex financial puzzle,
Yeah.
but we don't have all the pieces, and we're expected to, solve it on the fly.
Right. And to add to the complexity, even the tools we use to manage money are relatively new. I mean, your sources point out that index funds, which have become a very popular investment strategy, are less than 50 years old. Hedge funds with their, complex strategies and high fees didn't really take off until the last 25 years.
So not only are we grappling with new concepts and expectations, but we're also trying to make sense of all these, new financial instruments.
Exactly. And then let's not forget about consumer debt, the widespread availability of mortgages, credit cards, auto loans. I mean, that's a relatively recent phenomenon as well. That really only became commonplace after World War II.
It's amazing how much the financial landscape has shifted in such a short period of time.
It really is, and I think it helps explain why managing money in today's world can feel so challenging. We're essentially all newbies in this system trying to navigate a constantly evolving set of rules and expectations, which brings us back to the importance of understanding the psychology of money.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. So if we're all essentially financial newbies in this system that's changing so rapidly, then it becomes even more important to be aware of those, unconscious biases and emotional triggers that can sometimes lead us astray.
Precisely. It's not enough to just understand the technical aspects of finance. We also need to understand how our own minds work when it comes to money, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are some of the, psychological factors that we should be aware of when it comes to making financial decisions?
Well, one of the most important concepts is something called loss aversion. Studies have shown that people feel the pain of a loss much more intensely than they feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
So like losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good.
Exactly. And this fear of loss can lead to some, irrational financial decisions, for example. Investors might hold on to losing stock for way too long, hoping it will eventually rebound, even though, logically they should cut their losses.
Right. It's like we're wired to avoid pain, even if it means, sacrificing potential gains.
And this tendency is amplified by another psychological quirk called the sunk cost fallacy. And this is the idea that we're more likely to continue investing in something, whether it's a stock, a relationship, a project, whatever, if we've already invested a significant amount of, time, money, or effort into it, even if it's no longer serving us.
So it's like we're throwing good money after bad because we're emotionally attached to our past investments.
Precisely. And this can be a major obstacle to making sound financial decisions.
It's starting to feel like our brains are working against us when it comes to money.
In a way, they are. But the good news is that once we become aware of these biases, we can start to mitigate their impact. It's like learning the rules of the game so we can play it more strategically.
So awareness is the first step towards making more rational financial choices.
Absolutely, and that awareness extends beyond, just our own individual biases. It also includes recognizing that other people might be operating from a completely different set of money scripts based on their own unique experiences.
This reminds me of that story from your sources about the Chinese factory worker's nephew who was defending sweatshops.
Right.
His perspective, while jarring to some, really highlighted that vast difference in perspective that can exist based on socioeconomic realities.
Exactly what might seem like an objectively bad situation to someone living in a developed country, could be seen as a step up for someone living in extreme poverty.
Right. So it's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to money. And judging other people's financial choices without understanding their context can be incredibly, harmful.
It's about cultivating empathy and understanding, in financial conversations, recognizing that what seems outrageous to one person might make perfect sense to another, depending on their background and circumstances.
So how do we bridge these gaps in understanding and have these more productive conversations about money, even when those conversations involve these very different viewpoints?
That's a great question, and it's one that we're going to explore further in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into some strategies for navigating those, tricky financial conversations and how to make more informed decisions that align with your values and goals, even in the face of conflicting perspectives.
It sounds like navigating these financial conversations, especially when you have all these different perspectives and money scripts coming into play, can be a real challenge.
It can be, yeah.
So how do we do it? How do we have those conversations effectively and then ultimately make, the best financial decisions for ourselves?
Well, I think the first step, as we've been discussing, is awareness. Recognizing that everyone's coming to the table with their own unique set of experiences and beliefs, and try to understand where they're coming from before jumping to conclusions or offering unsolicited advice.
So it's more about listening than lecturing.
Absolutely. Active listening is crucial. Ask open-ended questions, try to see the situation from their perspective, and, avoid interrupting or dismissing their feelings. Even if you don't agree with their choices, you can still validate their experiences and try to understand their motivations.
It's about building that empathy and trust rather than, creating this sense of judgment or shame.
Exactly. And remember, you don't always have to have all the answers. Sometimes the best thing you can do is simply be a sounding board, offer support and encouragement as someone's navigating their own financial journey.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about how understanding money psychology can help us make better decisions even when we're dealing with these conflicting viewpoints.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Of course, one of the most powerful tools we have is the ability to question our own assumptions and biases. Those money scripts that we've been talking about, they're often operating in the background, influencing our choices without us even realizing it. So how do we bring those unconscious scripts, to the surface and actually start to challenge them?
Self-reflection is key. Take some time to think about your own financial beliefs and habits. Where did they originate? How have your past experiences, both positive and negative, shaped your financial decisions? Are those beliefs still serving you well, or are they holding you back?
It's like conducting a personal financial audit, and really examining our beliefs and behaviors with a critical eye.
And once you've identified some of those, deeply ingrained patterns,
Yeah.
you can start to challenge them. Ask yourself, is this belief based on facts, or is it based on, fear or just outdated assumptions? Is this financial habit aligned with my goals and values, or is it leading me down a path that I don't want to be on?
So it's about becoming more intentional with our financial choices rather than just reacting to circumstances or blindly following the scripts that we've inherited.
Exactly. And the more we understand our own motivations and biases, the better equipped we'll be to navigate those difficult financial conversations and make decisions that truly serve our best interests. It's like we're taking back control of our financial narrative, rewriting those outdated money scripts and creating a new story that's more empowering and fulfilling.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier the importance of making decisions that align with our values and goals.
Right.
How do those concepts fit into this equation?
Well, I think it's really easy to get caught up in the numbers and the shoulds of personal finance.
Yeah.
Save this much for retirement, invest in that, pay off your debt as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But if we're not clear about what truly matters to us, our values and what we want to achieve with our money, it's easy to get off track and end up feeling, stressed or overwhelmed or even resentful.
It's like trying to climb a mountain without knowing why you're doing it in the first place. You might reach the summit, but if it wasn't the right mountain for you, the victory will feel hollow.
So before we even start making those financial plans, we need to define what success actually looks like on a personal level.
Precisely. What are your priorities? What do you want your money to do for you and for the people you care about? Once you have a clear understanding of your values and goals, you can start to make financial decisions that support those aspirations rather than working against them.
It's about aligning your money with your life rather than the other way around.
That's a great way to put it. And when you approach financial decisions from that perspective, I think it becomes a lot easier to navigate those conflicting viewpoints and make choices that, really feel right for you, even if they don't conform to conventional wisdom or societal expectations.
I've got to say, this deep dive has been so insightful. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on the psychology of money. And, I'm walking away with some really tangible tools that I can use to make, more informed and intentional financial choices.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it's an ongoing journey. It's not a destination. There will always be new challenges and unexpected twists and turns. But the more you understand the psychological forces that play, the better equipped you'll be to navigate those challenges and create a financial future that's truly aligned with your values and your goals.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Okay, so this is a bit of a twist on a very common financial saying, but I think it's quite apt. Know thyself and then invest accordingly.
I love that. And it really ties in beautifully with everything that we've talked about today.
Mhm.
The importance of self-awareness, understanding our own money scripts, and then making choices that are aligned with our values and goals.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. If our past experiences have such a powerful influence on our financial behaviors, how can you proactively shape your future financial experiences to create the outcomes you desire?
That's a great question to leave everyone with. And it's a good reminder that we're not just, passive recipients of our financial circumstances. We really do have the power to create a new financial reality for ourselves, one that's more aligned with our values and our aspirations. So thanks for joining us for the deep dive into the psychology of money. We'll see you next time.